All right, so I didn't get much done this week, but I was just trying to make sure I had everything I needed to do the UHMW, and so I got the hardware kit out, and I'm like, okay, well, I need to figure out, the instructions, which I had downloaded online when I bought the boat a couple years ago. Bought the kit, and so I went online and checked for upgraded instructions just to see if they'd improved them at all. And they were identical, so I'm like, okay, well, so I read the instructions, and they've got arrows pointing to, which sections of the keel strip get screws at what distance between each other, what centers, and their centers range from 50, 75, 100, and 150 millimeters. 150 millimeters is basically 6 inches. 100 is 3 inches, 4 inches, 75 is 3 inches, 50 is 2. So you're talking like 3.9 and 5.9, so anyway, so I measured out the keel, put a tape measure on it, on the strip here, and, divided and figured out, how many screws I'm going to need. And now I wanted to check my kit. So, you've got varying thicknesses, which the front outer hull kit chunk pieces are 1/4 inch, I believe. And of course the keel is 3/8. So there's your thicknesses, and I was looking at the thickness, this is 3/8 UHMW. So basically if I countersink it, how deep is the screw going to be in there? Obviously you want the head below the surface, so and at the angle of the screws and the countersink, how much thickness is going to be here. And so what I came up with is this list here of what I was going to need first, which on the outside of the strip it's going to be 64. Then the center front where it's split, 16. Behind intake, about 20. On the 3 sides of the intake, left, right, and front, 32. And the center V section where it's bent, about 22. So when I pulled out my kit, and all these little baggies here came in this all bundled up tight. So I pulled out, and I better do a screw count, before I commit to this. And seemed kind of odd. I was like, well, all right. So I open each baggie, I count them out. So I've got these 1.25 inch, which I have 30 of. And I'm thinking, okay, I've got 3/8 and 1/4 inch material, the 3/8 UHMW, which the screw head's going to be sunk into. So I'm basically looking at, well, there may be say an 1/8 inch of UHMW that, the head doesn't go all the way down to the metal, or, and it looks like maybe 1/8 of an inch of UHMW will be left over. So I'm thinking, okay, 3/8 plus 1/8, we got a 1/2 inch of material that the threads will be in. So, threads come up to the head. So I'm looking at it going, well, these are obviously wherever they're supposed to go. They're going to be sticking 1 inch out at least, or not 1 inch, but say 1/2 inch, 5/8, whatever. And then I'm looking at it, and I'm like, well, all these nuts are crown nuts, and basically you get almost 1/4 of an inch that goes in there, and they're done. So I'm like, well, so apparently I have to, if I use these long ones, first of all, I'm trying to figure out what's the application for different length screws. I mean, I could see going from the 3/8 keel up to the outer hole strips in the front where you're screwing down the keel UHMW. It's going to be 1/4 inch material, so you could go shorter. And I'm just wondering what's the deal with the long ones. Instructions are really, they don't tell you a whole lot. So very little. Basically, they just tell you, use these, put your screws here, and the configuration is screw on the other side, washer, and nut. And so, and the washers have some thickness to them. So you got some, 1/8 inch there, maybe a little more, before you scrunch it down. You got this 1/4 inch here. Because it's a crown nut, you're limited. You gotta make that work. It's gotta tighten up before you bottom out. So I'm like, okay, well, so these screws, wherever you put them, you're cutting them off before you put the crown nut on, because you can't run it past where you're cutting and cut the top off. So anyway, I'm like, okay, well, I got 160 roughly screws, and that was adding a few for that center long V section. There's a few extra, between where they run down the line. So I'm like, okay, well, it's come up to 154 or something. I added 6, just made it an even 160. And so then it did my bolt count, and my bolt count's like 148, I believe. 46. So I got 146, probably need 160. So maybe my calculation's off a little bit, or that's just on a minimal scale of what I'm actually going to use. Maybe I'll figure out that discrepancy as I'm going along and doing the job. But I stopped and I picked up a few extra in the length that I thought would probably work for anything. Just to have them, and there's very little of that shape and size. And of course, these are Allens. Just locally at the shops and stuff, I couldn't find these Phillips head, which I like better. If you know anything about stainless, it's a soft metal. So when you're talking about screw heads, whether it be Phillips or Allen head, they're easy to strip out. And an Allen head is much more so, because this is, you can get a lot better bite on these 3 or these 4, this Phillips, than you can with an Allen. There's just not a lot of bite in the corners. So I'm like, well, it's not that big a deal. It's aluminum. It's not like you're going to be, unless you cross thread something, whatever. You'd be a little more careful with those. So, all right, I'm a little bit short, but then I've got this length issue. Well, these are 1/2 inch of thread. I've got 8 of them. And still don't know how that works anywhere other than to not put a nut on it. Because that 1/2 inch will fit the material, but it won't stick out the end on the inside of the boat. Then I have 38 5/8. So that puts me, at least on the 3/8, it puts me an 1/8 inch above. Now on the 1/4, that's probably enough to get a washer and a crown nut on. So, okay, maybe these are just for the front end of the boat, including these. Or maybe these are in a spot where you're not expect to be able to get a nut on it, because you're not going to on the 1/4 or the, at least not with the washer. So then what I have the most of, which was 70, is the 3/4 length, which will probably work best for the 3/8 section. Well, I'm like, well, it makes sense you got the most of those, because that's most of your keel strip bolt depth is the 3/8. So I don't know what the 1.25 inch are about. I've got 30 of them, so okay, I can use them, but if I use them, I have to cut them off and then thread on the crown nut. So then I'm like, okay, I better count these nuts and washers. Well, I got 100 washers and I got 100 nuts, and I've got somewhere between 146 or 48 and 160 screws to put in. So I'm like, are they expecting that 50 or 60 of these are not getting nuts? or washers. You know, and there's nothing in the instructions. If I had my laptop out here, I'd just show you. It's a single page. Basically just points out the distances and the nut, how you put the nut, washer, and screw together in what configuration. So I'm like, well, crap, you know, there's no place I can think of I can use crown nuts on 30, because I don't know if anybody here's ever cut a bolt off and then to thread a nut on afterwards. You generally whack it off, and then you would grind to a point, the front of it, which means grinding around, and then run it on a wire wheel, and then usually you can thread a nut right on. And like I said, stainless is even softer. It's easy to cross thread, so I'm like, that does not sound like a good option. And at some point in my build, I was using stainless with an impact to put nuts on, and it's soft enough to where even if the nut threaded on, and this is using nylocks. So if you use a nylock on stainless, you really don't want to impact it. You know, in other words, drive it on with an impact, because the nylock puts a bind on the threads, which is what it's supposed to do, to lock itself to the threads. But it puts a bind on the threads, and it also holds the threads. And stainless is soft enough to easily cross thread, putting a nylock on with a drill. So anyway, I'm like, well, so at no point in this process was I planning on using that drill on these bolts. So essentially, if I don't use a crown nut, if I use nylocks, I just simply run them on by hand, you know, make sure I'm straight and slow, and I'm not banging on the threads with the impact. You know, maybe you could use a regular drill to put them on, and it would work better than impacts. Impacts maybe beats on the threads and cause it to strip. So I'm like, well, okay, I've only got 100 crown nuts. So, and I've got all of these that there's no way I'm getting a nut on anyway. I've got all these that need to be cut off at some point to get a crown nut on them, which I'm thinking for where these would probably go, which is, you know, in the 3/8 at least. You know, it's probably going to be under the seat and back. You know, it's not like you're stepping around, you know, down to the bottom of the hole back there. You know, these sticking up wouldn't really be a problem, but I can't put a crown nut on them. So I'm just like, well, you know, and this was like yesterday, I finally got all this worked out. Like, okay, well, I'm not doing that this weekend because I'm gonna have to order, because I've already been in town. I can get tons of nuts in town because there's lots of stainless hex bolts, stuff like that. I'm sure I can get all the nuts that I need, but I can't get all the screws that I need. And so, you know, and personally at this point, I would just rather go 3/4 on everything, you know, and even try and use those crown nuts. If I can get the right length, bam, you know. So, you know, and one of my thoughts is, well, you might be close to, you might be on an angled portion of the hole where you're close to a stringer, and, you know, maybe it's coming in at such an angle where you can't use a long screw, because it would come up and hit the stringer after it came through, you know, or something like that. So you'd want to change up your sizes a little bit in certain places. But other than that, you know, looking at this keel strip, getting underneath the boat and looking up in there, it's like this whole section right here is just free and clear, because it's actually where the engine bears run across along the keel. There's like this much room. Like the engine bear will be here, and then you have pretty much clear space for this whole section of the strip. So I'm like, well, those are all just straight through easy money. You know, it's basically when you get up into here where you have that center stringer, and you know, up here as well, because you're going to be going around this, and there's a stringer that I can't remember how far back it goes. It might just go to there. I think it goes back here a ways, but anyway, it comes up through here. So I'm like, well, you know, no big deal, but a lot of these are just going to be clear cuts and straight, you know. And then of course I've got my my engine mounts, you know, I made a carriage that goes across, and there's enough room to get bolts and nuts in there. You know, some of them I'm gonna have to reach in underneath. I've only got like, you know, 1/2 inch maybe of clearance, so I'll get them in. It's just, you know, I'm gonna have to take them in so far, get in there and get them started, you know, use an end wrench, whatever. So anyway, not doing the keel strip this weekend, but I really haven't got anything done on the intake, the new intake grate, or the tubes in the back on the swim deck. So I got plenty to do, but it looks like I'm probably just going to order a bunch more of these screws so that I can use as many of these as possible, but I've only got 100. So if I want to put a washer on each one, which I think is advantageous, you know, they're nice rubber washer, and you know, I'm going to use sealant from the other side. I suppose you could use it on the inside if you wanted to run the washer into the sealant. You know, and then preferably nylox, but if I end up having a lot of strip, you know, a stripping problem, which I don't think I will if I'm just running them on my hand and I don't have too much screw sticking out, you know, I'd prefer to use nylox in those, just not zipping them on with the gun. So I think I need to order a bunch more of these, and I'm probably just going to pick up a bunch of nylox, and I'll use those crown nuts where it works out, the depth is right, you know, and I'll try, you know, the ones I order, I'll try and set it up to where all the crown nuts will work with those without having to cut the bolt and all that. So, and they're really nice heavy crown nuts. It's just the nut and washer doesn't even kind of line up with the quantity of the screws that I got, and the length of the screws aren't making a whole lot of sense to me. You know, I can see in the front where it's like, why do I have 8? I mean, 1/2 inch. You know, obviously they're going to be in the front somewhere because they won't go anywhere else. I mean, you know, you can put them in the back, but why would you if you could put a longer one in and get a nut and a washer on it? So whatever, that's annoying, but it's kind of how this whole thing's gone. So then I'm like talking to a guy at work, and I didn't even know about these, but this is a drill tap. So it's got the tap threads on the drill bit, and I'm like, well, that would be sweet because I got 100 and some of these things to do, and if those work well, you know, apparently they've been around forever, and it's a normal thing. I just, you know, never had a reason to do it. I thought, okay, well, I better test this out before I, you know, actually get this set up and everything's ready to go, because this is going to be a long job, especially for one person, and I'm really not sure I want to do it with one person, because as much as they'll probably need to go from the top of the boat to the bottom of the boat, top of the boat to the bottom of the boat, it's like, I don't know, I'm thinking about that still. I think if you do it in a certain way, it wouldn't be a problem, but the whole point, you know, one of the things they need to do is actually heat the hole up, you know, with the propane heater from down below, and, you know, get the UHMW warm, you know, get everything nice and clean. You're using sealant, so you're putting on sealant and you're putting in bolts, you know, and it's like if you put all the sealant on at one time and strap it down, I'll have to get all that set up to where I get UHMW fitting before I start bolting, and if I can get it to fit really well, without having to make adjustments as I go, then maybe I can put the sealant on all at once. You know, the adhesive, whatever you want to call it, and then clamp it down, and then, you know, to a degree that I don't have to get the screws in before the sealant cures. If that's the case, then I could take more time to do it, but I'm not counting on that. So so anyway, so I decided to do a test, and I thought, well, I need to find some 3/8 metal. I figured, well, I gotta have something around here, and basically just ended up, you know, I got this 5/16. I got tons of scrap of every other size, and this is the only 3/8 I could find, which came off of that 1.5 inch that I built the intake off of, and it was actually cut for the intake to size on one side. So I'm like, okay, cool, I got 3/8 here. I can kind of put this to a test, but mainly I just wanted to test the fancy drill thread tool. So went ahead and punched a couple of those in, you know, looked at them, put the screw in, they fit fine, you know, but I had some play there. I'm like, well, okay, you know, for what this is doing, it's drilling the hole and threading right behind it in the same shot while it's doing its impact thing, and it works great. I mean, you can pop that hole really quick. Now coming back up on the first one, I'm like, so I just kind of lifted up and then got it in reverse. I'm pulling through and had a little hang up there, I think. So I'm like, ah, crap, are these going to back through very well? And so the first one, you know, I put a bolt in and it's fine, but it's loose and the threads really don't look that good. I don't know if you can see those inside of these two. So I went in and did another one, but I was more careful backing it back out, and it backed out better because I just took my time to line it, make sure I was lined up with the threads, and then slowly back it out. And it's fine, you know. So I'm looking at the threads, I'm like, well, thread quality is not that great, you know, and it's loose. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and take my little 1/4-20 drill bit, you know, standard version, and see what the difference is. So went ahead and drilled it out with the specified drill bit that comes with the, you know, the number 7 or whatever it is on there. I think it said so, but so I do that, and of course you're doing the typical, you know, in out, you know, going all the way down and coming back out. Obviously it takes time, it's a lot more work, and you know, if you're looking at 150 holes, but at the same time, my thread quality is way better. Now I still had the play in it, you still, with the screw in it, still move it, and it was about the same as these two, but you can look at it and you can just see a nice clean, you know, non-gouged threads. So it's like, okay, thread quality is better. I feel better about that one, but we're talking a UHMW kit that's got nuts and washers on the other side, and these threads are working pretty good. Now I wouldn't trust these as far as stripping out. I think they strip out easier than this would, because these are nice, clean, it looks like full threads. So I'm like, well, for the UHMW, for that bolt kit, that's fine. And I don't even know if these are recommended. I have to look at it, but it says up to 1/4 inch. Okay, so these are made to cut through 1/4 inch and then cut the threads. At least on this one. Yeah, actually the one I use is the same one. So I guess that's not even really ideal for the 3/8, but it did it pretty well in 3/8 material. So I'm like, okay, I just noticed that, so I hadn't really thought it through before I made the video. So, you know, maybe ultimately I need to look at something that's got a longer front bit for the 3/8. Maybe it would come out a little cleaner. Maybe that's my problem, is it didn't drill the hole well enough. It didn't cut through the material clean before it started to cut threads. So it was still cutting material on the bottom side as the threads were starting up here, putting a bind on it. So maybe that's why my threads don't look as good. So, okay, between now and next weekend, I'm going to look for a drill bit that has a longer shank before it starts cutting threads in 1/4-20. But really impressed otherwise, you know, and otherwise we'd probably just go ahead, because it, you know, for doing this job, it'd be nice for the threads you're cutting to just suck down in material without having to get underneath and put a nut on it. If you're just drilling holes, then it appears that you would need to, you know, the way this process is done is drill the hole, put the bolt in, get underneath, tighten it up, and finish each hole top and bottom on each one. Now that would be, for one person, you know, that's going to be a long flipping day, or two, you know, that's going to be a lot of work. So I guess what I need to do, and this is the kit that I bought when I bought the boat, and I bought the keel straight at the same time. I bought this kit, and I just hadn't opened it till yesterday, day before, whatever it was. So, and without any instruction other than what Wattscraft has on their website, but you can download on PDF. Don't get all the length differences. So, and you know, maybe if some people are on good terms with RSR, they can call them up and talk to them about it. Really don't have any interest. I'm just gonna, you know, I haven't talked to them since I gave up on that whole situation. So I'm just gonna get the bolts I think will work best. I'm gonna get a bunch of nylocks. You know, in theory, you wouldn't even really need nylocks if you're threading the hole and you're putting the bolt under tension before you even get down and put the nut on. You know, if you use these washers, like if you're putting all these in, you thread them in, torque them down, and you can just go underneath and put all your washers and nuts on. Then you can just use some rain sealant, and then when you put a normal nut on, I found that marine sealant holds things really well. So you've got the threads in the material in the hole, plus you have the washer and nut. The washers fit tight on the bolt. I have to figure out where to get more of these. But washer fits tight on the bolt. It's actually kind of hard to push on. So with the nut down there with the little sealant on the threads, I really don't think that nut's coming off. You probably almost just use standard nuts, but I'll try the nylocks first, and if that goes well, I prefer the nylocks. If not, then I'll probably just go with standard nuts and use the crown nuts where it makes sense and I don't have to cut the bolt. So anyway, that's just setting up for doing the UHMW. These are some things I found. It's going to put this job off another week, but not sure I would have got to it this weekend anyway. Just have to spend a little more money, do a little more research. And if anybody's got any comments on my logic being flawed or maybe even a better idea, put it in the comments.